So there was a couple random stabbings in New York yesterday by someone known to the police, apparently known 7 times over, and yet allegedly without mental health issues, which who knows where the winds are going to blow on that. Though his neighbor said he didn't respond to courtesy hails, so we know that they're at least a weirdo or someone who doesn't speak English, but they'll probably end up going the mental health route with it anyway. It's what they always do. Anyway, there's not a whole lot to get into as far as details with that, so I'll just show the tweet by Police Commissioner Tish, who still animates her face exactly like Wallace from Wallace and Gromit, and no, I cannot get over the fact that she still does that, but I do think there's something worth talking about with the story, not with Tish's facial animations. The need for an investigation. First of all, I'm not going to waste time imagining that it's all the fault of Mamdani and communism. In fact, despite the man, Raul Morales, being alleged to have shouted Admiral Akbar whilst stabbing, and I'm giving this my best shot, Chok Sung and Mush Yejek Grunaus. Sorry, I mean, I'm sure that's horribly wrong. I'm not actually blaming Mamdani much for this. Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gideon Sa'ar, thinks otherwise. Gideon stated, "I am appalled by the horrific anti-Semitic stabbing attack in New York. Appalled, but sadly not surprised. This violence did not happen in a vacuum. Months of incitement against the Jewish state from Mamdani have helped create a climate in which Jews are targeted. Words have consequences. Mamdani must end the incitement, confront anti-Semitism with resolve, and act now to protect the city's Jewish community. Enough is enough." Of course, someone in his position would say that, and I agree to an extent. Mamdani is a Muslim, so obviously the mere fact that he's been elected as mayor is going to create some tension, and he's been calling Netanyahu a war criminal in the very recent history, so there's that. But here's the thing. I remember being on Reddit even before Mamdani was elected, and people on there were fantasizing about bombing Israel off the planet. They were. And they weren't just saying it, they were getting upvoted for it. It was hitting the main page regularly. That wasn't Mamdani's fault. It's not his fault that, 10% of New York is Jews, I think? It's somewhere around 10%. It's not Mamdani's fault that Jews are now the biggest target of hate crimes in New York, at least not entirely his fault. I've made plenty of commentary about my dislike for him. I'm not just defending him here. And it's not just him either, it's the general trajectory of New York. So I'm not defending him. It's just an objective and provable truth that the left wing has been radicalized against Israel ever since they first bombed Gaza, which was a hot minute before Mamdani's election. That's probably why Mamdani was even elected to begin with, don't you think? So rather than blaming him, I would blame the average Democrat. I would blame the voter. Besides, there's plenty of other things to blame on Mamdani and hang around his neck. Isn't it far stranger that the average American Democrat wants to obliterate the Jews while simultaneously screaming Nazi at anyone who disagrees with the Democrats? Isn't that far more peculiar? Obviously, Mamdani would be anti-Jew, but he at least condemned the attacks publicly. The Reddit tiers, who aren't even Muslim, they want this to happen, and that's far odder to me. I guess my point is that this is being investigated as a hate crime, and you know that meme, I'm a simple man, so when I blank, I blank? Well, when it comes to things like this, I'm a simple man. When I see random stabbings, I think of Woodchipper Avenue. Population 1, scratch that, 0. I'm not interested in determining whether or not it's a hate crime. And then I start to wonder who cares about identifying the reasoning, especially when no one died. If there's a fatality, there's some desire for closure, but here there's no strong need for it, is what I mean. This action does not need to be labeled as anything other than antisocial, which is a term often misused by people who simply want a clerk at a clothing store to leave them alone, but antisocial really means someone who is breaking society with their antisocial behavior, like going around and stabbing people. So who benefits from notarizing it as racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or anything else? Given the circumstances, I would think Republicans, but were the shoe on the other foot, the Democrats would do the exact same. The difference, of course, is that if some enraged Republican zealot went on a stabbing spree, it wouldn't be in the name of some foreign god, would it? It wouldn't be for the sake of conquering America, like sappers sent inside the walls. yes, Republicans benefit from stringing this out to be as painful as possible for everyone involved. And once upon a time, I would have thought that was petty, shallow, and pathetic. Now, however, I'm starting to wonder what craziness the Democrats would instill in the country if they had power. They've already sworn to hunt down ICE. They promised that to their voters. When they get presidential power, they're going to hunt down ICE and punish them, right? They've said it many times. But what else? It won't be the end of days, obviously, no more than it was when Trump won and the Democrats thought they would be slaughtered like swine, only to realize that the worst thing to happen to them was that they would have to admit their real gender. And I guess pay more for gas, but that wasn't part of the initial fear bomb, so to speak. That was rather a form of dessert. Well, I don't know what the Dems would have in store, but their celebrity politicians are making a lot of strong claims, which is stoking the fires of civilians, much like Mamdani's claims in New York. Most politicians might be quietly doing their work behind the scenes, but the ones whipping people into a furor, they can only make me presume that they'll redouble their efforts in a presidential role to satisfy the children and the boomers to whom they have promised positive vibes in exchange for unlimited power. And to that end, I'm not entirely against investigating this to see if it's a hate crime, which if he is shouting Admiral Akbar, you can bet your ass that it will be. See, I feel like the Republicans, they need to be shrewd hypocrites to maintain power. And being a hypocrite, it's typically seen as a bad thing. But if a crackhead told you to never do crack, you'd believe him, right? I wish I didn't have to go against my better nature here. In normal times, like I said, I would just press the power button on old Chippy. But in these times, where Democrats are stating that prisons and police, law and order, crime and punishment are all facets of white supremacy, and that all people need is some state-sponsored mental health to cure them of all of their afflictions and solve all the problems, well, people need their eyes open. Having madmen prowl the streets under the light of day and stabbing innocents with screwdrivers and knives while screaming religious fury, well, that makes for a pretty strong message, especially to the Jews. Anyway, that's a very long-winded way to say, I told you so, but if you stuck around, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, please do the YouTube things.